Welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show. And my guest today is in the same master drumming discussion as Warren Smith, Joe Chambers, Max Roach, Bill Kreutzmann, Eddie Marshall, and Ndugu Chancellor. He was born in Belleville, Illinois, and studied percussion at Champaign-Urbana, while simultaneously gigging with a relatively unknown Barbra Streisand. Then he moved himself out to what the Chinese call the Shining City on the Hill, San Francisco. And he played with Jerry Garcia, Jerry Hahn and the Brotherhood, Joe Henderson, Harold Land, Terry Riley, and Maria Muldaur, among others. Before labels became the dominant identifier in music, my guest was like most of my guests, a jack of all trades, just feeling and fitting into any musical setting. No idioms were discussed, just trust, feel, and security through life experience and peer relationships. Along with teaching privately in academia, he currently tours with David Dog Grisman and has recently published a book entitled Inner Drumming, which, among other things, tries to articulate how body positioning and posture can greatly enhance the swinging and alacrity of young drummers who might not even be aware of these kinds of things. Mind over matter with gifted percussionist George Marsh. Welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Hey, hello. Nice to hear all that stuff. Some of it's true. Actually, all of it is.
It is, man. I mean, I just off the top, I mean, I was reading you do a lot of Tai Chi and a lot of other,
Well, I have done a lot of Tai Chi in the past, and I'm going to get back into it. It's one of those studies that requires a lot of time.
My question is, what I wanted to ask is, how many musical lifetimes do you feel like you've lived?
Well, I've never thought of that one. I feel like there's a lot of music that's changing all around me, and I basically stay in the center of it as much as I can. And I'm 71, so the responsibilities and abilities do change around that. But basically, here's what it is: keep interested in the art and keep listening very deeply. And as a jazz drummer, and what really turned me on to it, keep it swinging. Now, that means a lot of different things to different people. But what I do want to do is teach that and continue to play that way. Does that make sense?
Oh, keep going. When you say keep it swinging, the primary job, that's the primary job of the drummer.
Well, I think so. And that keeping it swinging is what does that mean? That's the next question. and if you take a jazz rhythm section of the 60s, 50s, and 60s, there's a certain way the drummer played. And that started to open up more, and the drummers became more melodic. So there's a different requirement or opportunity there. And I've always kept two things going. This is kind of important, I think, for me, as I've always really loved the deep swing of swing music, like Lester Young, and I grew up with that stuff. And I think one of the most sophisticated rhythmicists was Louis Armstrong. If you actually listen to what he was doing, laying those things in, how could he play four notes and the whole band was swinging? How could he do that? and they all were on the beat, except they really weren't, if you analyze them. But anyway, I study rhythm per se. Just rhythm is interesting to me, and that swinging deep groove is what really thrills me. But there's also another way of playing music, and it's completely free improvisation. And I've been working with a woman named Pauline Oliveras for many years, 25 years now, who basically invented that term, deep listening. And it's another way of improvising. You can improvise with people who aren't jazz musicians. They might not even be that adept at their instruments, but there's ways of improvising together where you really focus on listening to one another, and then that's another deep subject.
Yeah, no, that's why I feel very strongly that when you get back from your tour that we're going to have to do part two, because there's something about when I think of you and Mel Graves and Jerry Garcia, Grisman, Jerry Hahn, there was one of the key things that you guys unconsciously didn't realize about growing up was that you were able to become you were self-educated in some ways. You didn't have to go to academia to learn because you had accessibility within venues. You had multiple venues, and you clearly had a system set up where big acts would come to town, whether or not Streisand was even, like you said, she was a relative unknown when you played with her. But the idea is that,
actually, yeah.
But my point is that you got this. You could get schooled, but at the same time, your best school was playing with this incredible group of intellectual guys who knew how to play music, and that was from experiential learning more than anything else. That's what my research has told me.
Well, that's absolutely true. And I went to the University of Illinois in the early '60s, and I think it was '61 when I went there. It was only that year was the first year that the dean of the music school at University of Illinois would allow you to practice jazz in the practice rooms. That was hilarious. So I was there just when they allowed you to play it, allowed you, quote unquote. And a guy named John Garvey, who was a brilliant viola player in the Walden String Quartet, got a jazz band going. So the thing was really promoted. So the University of Illinois was really happening in the early '60s. I played with J.J. Johnson there. He came in and did some things. But we did all learn from listening and observing and just gobbling it up. I was imprinted. That's the way I like to look at it. When I was 15, I would go see people like Art Blakey and his Messengers. And so when I was 15, it was 1956, and in St. Louis, see Art Blakey.
Can you talk about
Elvin Jones, who was playing with I forget who it was, but he wasn't well known then. And different players like that, and basically it was just like you see them over and over again. I saw Miles and Philly Joe and Coltrane, and you just watch them. And that's something that the younger players generally speak. Well, they don't have access to that because those particular musicians are mostly gone. So they have to do it by listening, and then the techniques are taught, the drummers, and those techniques are great. I mean, the drummers are playing with more facility now than ever. But there's an attitude and an approach and a feel in jazz that I'm trying to somehow transmit or help them with, when I teach.
What could you talk a little bit when you were sitting there at a bar or a coffee house, or watching Blakey or an unknown Elvin Jones? What were those things that made you just sort of? Was it just their focus and the sheer energy and power, or was it something even more intimate than that stood out to you that you felt?
Well, let's take Art Blakey. I saw him 2 times. I'll tell you several things. One of them, it was at a place called Peacock Alley in St. Louis, and it was in the black ghetto, and we were like kids from a Catholic high school, and one of us was 16, so we could drive.
Right.
And we went there, and our feeling was we were going to something sacred. May sound corny, but that's how it felt. And we went there, and the guy at the door, after we got down there, where the club was, would say, "Well, okay, you guys can come on in," and then told the bartender, "No drinks for these guys, but no alcohol." So we bought our Coke each set, and it was definitely a concert situation. And we were right there in the front row, and I was 8 or 9 feet from Art Blakey, and he did not play loud. He played with absolute taste, and it was. The swinging part, I'm talking about trying to teach swinging or transmit it or point it out. And the swinging part was a given. All this music had that very strong pulse in it. And here were these people who were producing magic music, especially Art Blakey. He was very, very tasty. Only later did I fully realize the genius that he had. He was a genius because you listen back to that music and most of it sounds perfect. And hear that anymore. Which it's okay because we're in a different time. So you're talking the 50s, the late, 57. It was a different time, and that music definitely expressed that. And I don't think it should sound that way now. It would be kind of weird.
But you said something really important, and it was almost like a spiritual journey. I mean, you were looking at it as a something.
It just was.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
And looking back on it, it was. African Americans looked down upon, not in my family, but I did grow up in Belleville, Illinois, and it's near St. Louis, and there were a few people that you would meet who would say the N-word, and they would express that attitude. And I had already been turned on to and listened to Art Blakey and Duke Ellington and Count Basie, and guess what? None of that stuff sunk in.
No,
because those guys were geniuses,
Yeah,
absolute geniuses. And I'd hear someone say something, and it's like, what are you talking about? So anyway, so in some ways, these musicians, which I figured out later, were like beacons. Here we are, folks. We're the same as you, and in fact, we've invented this music. Thank you very much. So it was spiritual in that sense. I felt protected because I would be warned, don't go over in that ghetto, it's dangerous and all that. We went over there, it was all fine.
Right.
We were greeted, come on in.
What about East St. Louis, Illinois, too? There were clubs over there. I think that was the other thing, is that there were theaters and clubs built inside the black communities, which fostered. Even later on, we're getting a little bit, more to the idea. You had Sly and the Family Stone would come through, James Brown would come through, Otis Redding would come through. I mean, you really had places.
That's after I left.
Right, but there were places to go see music in the black neighborhoods. Now there's really, you just don't want to be seen walking in these neighborhoods. There's no place to
go. I know, yeah. That's probably because of the drugs and all of that. All that horrible thing. Excuse me while I cough.
Tell me about some of the records. Did you ever get any of those Jack Berger records, the bongo record? Like, what were some of the early records that you were listening to that kind of got you into just banging on things, percussion, or was it just?
Well, the very beginning was when I was a kid, and I was listening to Duke Ellington records, 78 that my mother had, and even Dick Spiderbeck and Red Nichols and the Five Pennies, and these when I was a kid, we had these 78, so I'd listen to those. But then later on, I got really into West Coast jazz, especially Shelly Manne.
Oh yeah,
it all centered around Shelly Manne, and of course Buddy Rich too, of course. And but those particular records, you get them on 45 extended play EPs. And I'd got some Little Charlie Parker I liked, but I'm talking about when I was 11, and 12, I would listen to those. And so, being a white kid in the Midwest, Shelly Manne's music and the West Coast music spoke to me in a different way than the harder-edged music of someone like Art Blakey, which just had that vibe to it. So that was my first entree into buying, and really focusing on being a fan of a certain kind of music with those great arrangements. The
great arrangements and the stuff I have from the Black Hawk with Victor Feldman, who was an amazing percussionist as well.
Yeah, that's later stuff. That sure is beautiful. Yeah.
But you're going before that.
Oh yeah, I'm going before that. So
you are. You're
11 and 12
we're digging deep here.
So that's 50. 54.
Like,
pretty long time ago.
So you decide to go to Champaign-Urbana. Was that just it was local? It was close. Were there other schools that were recruiting you, or did it just make sense to?
Nobody was recruiting me.
Right.
No, I don't think there. But back then, I just looked up what it cost for a year of tuition at University of Illinois. It was like $65. or no, for a semester, $65.
Right. That sounds reasonable.
for a semester of college education. So that's why I went there. It was a good university, and it was inexpensive. And then what we had to pay for was food and a place to stay, stuff like that. So the family could afford to have me go there. And I studied engineering at first because everybody did. And then I had a teacher when I was studying engineering differential calculus. He took me aside and said, maybe you better go into music.
Yeah,
because I was losing interest in it. I could have done it, but I was just losing interest. So then I had a talk with this guy named John Garvey and just dived into it and studied music there with Tom Siley and Jack McKenzie, two really fine teachers. In fact, Tom Siley just got the one of the all-time special awards at Percussive Arts Society. It's called PASIC. So really nice.
Did they, aside from technique, what were some of the things that they instilled in you that you still pass along to your students today?
Oh, well, that would be the kinds of music were revealed to me, like Stockhausen, Karl-Heinz Stockhausen's music, and other kinds of contemporary, at that time, composers' music. It wasn't at all like jazz, yet it appealed to me in a very strange way. It's like, at first it was like just an odd taste, and then listening to it for a while, I enjoyed it, and I really figured that I could use what I learned from that music in my improvisation, which is another thing that I think, you mentioned all those different players, Jerry Hahn, Jerry Garcia, etc. One of the things when I listen back to that music, like with the Jerry Hahn Brotherhood, you've heard that record?
Oh, we're going to play a little bit of it.
Yeah. Well, that was the way we played that music that day.
Oh, that is unbelievable.
Now, if you listen to the Grateful Dead, they improvised, they improvised their composition. Not always, but sometimes they would. So you would hear a piece one time, and then you hear it another time, and it would be played differently. And that was something that struck me. And so in the Jerry Hahn Brotherhood, there would be certain times when I would be the one that would be I just changed the feel. And Jerry loved that. And we would just go different directions, and the next time it would go another way, and we would all enjoy it. So that it was I wouldn't always be the one, but very often I would be the one that was kind of leading different directions that the music could be played.
It's funny because I've been listening to a lot of the Brotherhood in preparation for this interview, and it just strikes me as, there's like a country sound. Finnegan brings this sound in there that with that organ and the vocals, and you're
Absolute
there.
He's a master musician.
I got to tell you. I really wanted to ask you this question: is, how did you guys feel as a band? Were you trying to? I'm not saying trying to be like the Grateful Dead, but you had your own thing going on. You opened for these kind of bands, the Brotherhood.
Well, it was I put it this way: it was in the air.
It was in the air.
Yeah, people played this way. There were musicians like Archie Shepp and Cecil Taylor playing completely out.
Yeah.
At that time, and Miles Davis. Tony Williams was with Miles Davis. And that was another thing where Tony Williams was I call it creative destruction. It's like they were playing tunes and he was creatively destroying isn't the right word, but deconstructing would be the word. And they were doing it in their way, and we were doing it in our way too. And the Grateful Dead was. So it was a way of playing a kind of music that has a form. It could be AABA or whatever, but it's going to be redone for you. And we would play places, and I don't think folks got it. It didn't seem that unusual to us, but there was a lot of response from people about it being revolutionary. I don't think it felt that revolutionary. It was just playing.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, I think that's the point. Is that I just want to go back. You said that record, the Brotherhood record. That's the way we played that day. It was, what I notice with my friends now that are in bands. There's a lot of self-absorption, where it's like you play a show and then you're listening to what you did the next day and then the day after that, and it's kind of like, to me, you're going to find yourself in a rut after that because you're not really growing at that point. But the thing that we cannot overlook here is that somehow you say it's in the air. But Danny Zeitlin, Jerry Hahn, Mel Graves, George Marsh. I mean, you guys were serious. You guys could play. Not everybody can play music. I mean, that's the thing. You can incorporate you can be as intellectual as you want. I mean, for me, I'm not a musician. I'm a journalist. But I feel it so strongly at that time that it was so organic in the way it worked. And it was so natural that... It just comes straight through, and for you as a player, I'm sure like you said, it's not rocket science, but I can tell with my ear that it was, and I don't think you guys were into making a hit either. I mean, you guys were just out to play.
Well, we were. We wouldn't have minded.
That sort of makes it even better. I mean, that's the point. Is that you guys weren't approaching it with any type of ego. I mean, I look at you guys and I just because the truth is, for the audience, I mean, my exposure to George Marsh really occurred at this period of time when he went out to the Bay Area, and it just seems like that was a magnet. It doesn't matter if it was Michael Howe or Jerry Hahn or George Marsh, Calvin Keyes. Anyway, they all seem to wind up there. And
it's like this is kind of where a lot of mavericks came. I lived in Chicago before that, and had a lot of ideas about creating music that moved in a little different direction, but I could feel that it would have been almost impossible to do it there. The AACM did it with Roscoe Mitchell and those guys, but I wasn't connected to them. Do you know who they are, the AACM?
Absolutely. I was going to ask you about Alvin Fielder and those guys. I've touched on that stuff. Is very far out, but obviously the genesis of it was in Chicago.
Yeah, and I remember hearing a concert with Roscoe and a bunch of guys back in 67, 66 maybe, and it was just sublime, just absolutely great. But that was pretty much an African American energy, and that's the way it should have been at the time. I believe it's more open now. And I play with Roscoe Mitchell from time to time, and some of those guys, and everything is really changed. But that was an amazing development of music.
When you say maverick, you mean I want to just make this clear because it's one of my theses is that someone like Freddie Hubbard or Lee Morgan, I tend to think that they were mavericks because they were creating music, like you said, that was going in different directions. And it was not, the onus was not on pleasing the audience because the audience wasn't paying $50 to go see a show to hear the tunes they wanted to hear. Those guys were saying, we're making creative music, we're going to be mavericks, and it's not our job to please you. You can sit and listen, and we hope you dig it, and if you do, great. If you don't, it's not our problem. That is the genesis of it was, we're making music that we feel strongly about. That's what Howard Johnson told me, the great tuba player. I asked him, I said, I asked him about going to New York around roughly the same time you went to the Bay Area. I said, did you run into a lot of like-minded cats? He goes, I don't think they were like-minded. He goes, I think they were as independent as I was. And that to me struck out like that. I think that's the point. Is there's a quality of individualism that just is righteous.
Yeah. Well, the kind of music that I prefer to play would be embodying a lot of study and work amongst the players, in which we try to find out who we are. At least that's the way it is now. And to reach a place of bliss, basically, and this does happen, if you work with the right players, and since we're not getting paid hardly anything for this, you just pick the players that you really want to play with. So, as an improviser, it's basically been a pretty blissful situation, and then one would hope that the audience is going to pick up on that. So it's not closed off. I personally include the audience in my performance in that way. Like, I'm sharing this. This is really an amazing thing that's going on, and it's actually art being created right in front of you. And we musicians have worked on it and picked one another so that this is going to happen most of the time, or a lot of the time. So that's my view of it. It's one in which I really, really include the audience. So anyway, hope that answers something.
No, I mean, but it comes down to the fact that you whether it was the Both and the Black Hawk, the El Matador, the Fillmore West, it was just people were playing and trying to grow and learn. It wasn't this. I mean,
oh, absolutely.
I mean, I was going to ask you what I was looking at your tour a little bit with the dog, and you're playing at some pretty cool places. You're going up to Montana, and
Well, some of those I don't know if you're the only one that I'm with is the sextet or the quintet. And the other stuff would be more, bluegrass, out and out bluegrass, in which there's no drummer.
How would you when you go in the sextet or the quintet configuration? How would you describe the venues, like the size and also the intimacy between the audience and yourself?
Well, the size in the summer is very often it's like I guess it's ski lodges, and they open themselves up. They're opened up for concerts in the summer, and we're going up to the Grand Targhee Lodge. We'll be playing there this Saturday, and that's going to have 10,000 people.
Wow, 10,000! They're thirsting for this stuff.
And 10,000, and David really is a taskmaster in the best sense, and I love it. I mean, there's certain things he really wants to have happen in these arrangements. So his band, his group, is like a chamber group, and it has to swing, and that's really important, and it's very demanding. And my role very much is more of a supporter in that particular band. And that band is not at all like the Jerry Hahn Brotherhood, where I would be changing the arrangement. I would never do that with David. So in some ways, it's the opposite. But the one factor is that it's filled with great musicians, and he's just absolutely amazing to me. I mean, he has a voice. That's the important thing. Oh, Jerry Hahn has a voice, And David Grisman's voice is very strong and he plays very heartfelt music and always working on it. So we'll get together and rehearse and go over the tunes, and I would say 99% of the tunes are his. Occasionally we'll do something else. We do Bag's Groove, or for a while we were doing a tune of mine and a tune of Matt Eckel, the flute player, and then something that Jim Kerwin wrote. And so, but mostly it's David stuff. So that's what that is. That's very high profile, and my feeling is that it's just as intense and swinging when there's 10,000 people or if there are 50. Truly is in some ways no different. The only difference would be that when you're playing for that many people, very often you get on stage and you don't have long enough to play. Sometimes it's an hour. I believe with the featured act this time.
Yeah, I mean that's confounding. 10,000 people. I mean that sounds more like a Grateful Dead concert with like serious electric output. But I mean, Can you talk about the instrumental configuration of the band?
It's an acoustic mandolin.
Yeah,
we have good microphones. and it's I forget whether I think it's the quintet on this one. So that wouldn't have the violin. So we have acoustic guitar, flute, of course, is acoustic. and acoustic bass, but the bass he'll run it through an amp. And myself, that's 5, I believe. Oh, and yeah, it's 5. And sometimes if it's a sextet, there's a violin. So that sound we dial in. We really know how to deal with the sound people on stage, and I have a little monitor to make sure I can hear everything. We all have monitors. We try to keep it at a level on stage that isn't loud. We just don't do that kind of music, the ultra loud stuff. And when we can, we try to ask the people that are doing the sound. Of course, when you have 10,000 people, you can't. We just don't want them to be blasted by the sound. But a lot of these things are bluegrass festivals. And Del McCurry, do you know his music?
Absolutely.
You know how great he is. I mean, he's like the best. I think he might be on this particular festival. And people like that, so the people that are running the sound and the people that are coming to it aren't there for the totally loud kind of music. So it seems like it has an intimate kind of transmission to these people. Because if the sound's not knocking you against the wall, if it's the right level, and the sound on stage is the right level, then it just feels great.
Well, and also you're playing these great tunes like the Milt Jackson tune "Bag's Groove." That's a great lilting, beautiful jazz tune. It's not going to knock anybody over, and you can still play It's nice to know those things are still out there. Although I would prefer to have seen George Marsh with Harold Land, Joe Henderson, back when you first got to the Bay Area. Those guys, Joe Henderson. I've talked to enough guys to play that have played with him to know that a genius and spoke many different languages. But he would play a gig and then he'd disappear. He's like the Phantom. He would just leave right after the gig. He didn't want to deal with any. He didn't want to talk. And the more guys I talk to, I'm trying to think here. Yeah, no, I just interviewed Charles Owens, the multi-reedist, and he said that in 1972 or so, Frank Zappa called Harold Land, and he's like, I need somebody that plays oboe and saxophone, and Harold recommended him for Zappa's The Grand Wazoo Tour because Ernie Watts was getting too busy with Hollywood and all this kind of stuff. And what I'm just trying to say is the overlap. There was just so much intermeshing and overlapping. I'm just confounded by it, being somebody who didn't grow up in it and is searching for that accessibility now. I just was hoping you could kind of take us through how you got opportunities to play with some of these guys who are already well established out there.
So searching for the accessibility means you would like to hear some of these players in different contexts.
When I say accessibility, I'm talking about venues.
I bet the way to do that is to move to New York now.
Yeah, right. And I'm going to live in a closet for $3,000 a month with my family. It is impossible.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I was in Chicago. I could have moved east or west.
Right, and you could. But I remember talking to a guy roughly your age back in the day at Tower Records in Boston, and he was a dishwasher in downtown San Francisco, and he had a beautiful high-rise apartment overlooking the bay for $200 a month. I'm not trying to be nostalgic. I'm just saying it was the ability to the transient. You were able to. You could move. You could go somewhere and not be buried under the crush of the cost of living. But more to the point.
That's changed in San Francisco. That's
I know
cost
that.
of living's high everywhere actually now. But back to the other question. A lot of different ways. I played with Joe Henderson because Mel Graves brought him in. Well, the first time I played with him, I was at a studio practicing, which I shared with a great drummer named Steve Mitchell, who was the drummer who did all the studio work in San Francisco. I guess it was the 80s. And Joe Henderson dropped by, and he played piano, and we jammed a little bit, and then he hired me for a gig, and we played at a local jazz club, and that was, let me see, Joe Henderson was on it, and Eddie Henderson was playing trumpet.
Oh my God, dude! I did a great interview with Eddie because was he a doc student at that time, or was that?
No, he was no longer a student. No, he was a player, a local player. I don't know if he was practicing. What was he, a psychiatrist or what kind of? I forget. He was a doctor of some kind. He
was like psychiatrist.
Yeah.
Who was El? So was you? Joe, Eddie, and who else is in that band?
I'm thinking it was Frank Tusa, the bassist. I forget who's playing piano.
Oh man, I mean,
the guys were a little ripped. I'll take that out.
No, I mean yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's okay because I think that it clearly that was part of the scene, and that I am locked into. But I'm not sure if that's necessarily a bad thing. And
right.
You know, I really do. I mean, when it comes to consciousness and freedom and being able to just play what you feel, I think that stuff is pretty valid. But I just, you know, when you did you feel, but when you got out there, did you have like a certain direction musically that you wanted to go in, and you sought people out, or was it just a very organic kind of thing? And there was just you could get off the BART rail, and there were people sitting there playing outside the station. You could take a lesson there.
Oh, you mean when I first moved here? You're talking about?
Yeah, let's go. I got the impression you were playing with them when you first got out there.
No, this was later. When I first got out here, let me see. I played a few gigs. I had some connections with a guy named Bill Matthew, whose later name was changed to Aladdin Matthew, and he was the Second City pianist and teacher in Second City. Do you know what that is?
No.
So that's it. It's the spawning ground of John Belushi and a lot of different comedians.
Wow.
Who you will have seen on Saturday Night Live later, and Alan Arkin and all kinds of people, Mike Nichols, Elaine May. These people were connected in one way or another with Second City, which was like a training ground. People would come there and they would work every day on theater games and skits and improvisational techniques, and then they would perform at night, most of which would be improvised comedy, and some of it would be skits. And they would do this, I guess, 6 days a week for years. And then they go on and be successful in other realms. So anyway, he was a pianist for them, and he and I, back in before I moved here, this is an important part of everything. This might explain a lot. We got together with an improvising group, and we worked with music games that we invented. And he especially invented them. And Rich Fidoli was a saxophone player, and Clyde Flowers is the bassist. So we created these ways of improvising together and exploring improvisation. So games such as silence, so you create sound together and then pause, and the focus of the game is what kind of silence, quote unquote silence, did you just create. That'd be a simple game. Another one would be play as dense as possible together, improvising. Another one would be play as dense as possible, but as quiet as possible at the same time. Another one would be playing as sparse as possible, on and on and on. In other words, ways of approaching playing together as musicians that aren't specifically jazz. They're dealing with aspects of music, aspects of sound, aspects of approach. So does that kind of make sense?
Oh, I've never heard anyone talk about that. I mean, I think that now, first of all, the games and the idea of the overlap of entertainment with the Second City thing lent itself to a lot of creative freedom. It's beautiful, but it also, there was no real de facto leaders. I mean, people, when you played or when you tried to hone in, whether it was as little sound as possible or as dense as possible, you guys were on your own. I mean, nobody was saying, George, tone it down. I mean, it was just, you guys were just...
Well, if George was playing too loud, the next game would be, let's all play and make sure we don't play too loud. You see, you can deal with it without playing someone.
Oh, I like that. So that's very different, though. I mean, okay, that's cool.
So if I'm working with a group of players who are younger and they're playing, and let's say the saxophone player isn't listening to the rhythm section. These are students, let's say. I'll say, let's do this again, but let's make sure we're all listening to the rhythm section.
You're not calling anybody. You're not calling anyone out. Yeah.
So anyway, it's a way of looking at it that's positive. And the other thing about playing these games is it creates trust with one another and within yourself. And so that particular way of playing is an important part of what was carried over when I came here and then joined Jerry Hahn and the Jerry Hahn Brotherhood. There were ways of playing that I had already explored that I would never, ever be able to do in the traditional jazz context. Because in the jazz context, you have rules, and they're great. They're amazing. But the drummer plays a certain kind of time feel with the bassist, and if it's a piano, there's an accompaniment to a soloist. Well, in the Brotherhood, it was a lot different. I could change up, and rock and roll already was starting to get, whatever that is, but it's starting to get its rules. The backbeat's always on 2 and 4, etc. Well, I never cared about that. I know where 2 and 4 is.
Right.
I don't need that. I'd rather change it around.
Oh, I love it.
And in fact, I played with Chuck Berry back in '70 when I was with the Loading Zone, and we played all the time. And I played all kinds of stuff, and he wasn't ruffled by it at all. That's fine. But he was fine with that. So the rules, and Mose Allison really clarified this. I worked with him about 20 years. He didn't want his drummers to play backbeat. Now, I'm not saying backbeat's bad, but this is these guys. He didn't want his drummers to play backbeat because he thought it was invented by the A&R man in the studios. That, somebody got a hit, so the backbeat. Okay, well, the next one better have that too. And you listen to the music starting in the '80s, the backbeats started to sound like machine guns.
Wow.
They were so loud. It's a gradual. I observe this happening, and in some cases that's okay, but in other cases you can just hear that this is not a good musical approach. At least that's my idea. So what was the original question?
Well, it doesn't really matter because at this point we're going to do a little out of order here, but I want to play a little bit of George Marsh in his glory day. Well, he's still in his glory days, but I want to play a tune here, and we'll come back and we'll go through it. Okay?
Yeah, sure.
I look at Garcia, and I say, well, the two best guitar players in the Bay Area at that time must have been Jerry Hahn and Jerry Garcia.
Yeah, exactly right.
And I'm wondering about. I mean, because that makes it's so exciting for me because Jerry told me at that session that of course this was done at Fantasy Studios and you guys were working as a that was Mel and you and as a trio, and he really wanted somebody just to play some organ lines, some jazz lines, and Merle Saunders was walking by. He's like, "Hey Merle, come in and play with us." And Merle just came in and he just fit in so perfectly. But I mean, you guys were razor tight, man. It just flowed, and I know that was in a studio, but it's that cyclical nature. It's that it just speaks to me, and it speaks to the intimacy. But Hahn and Garcia, talk about those two guys, the paths they took, and if they had a relationship at all, because they were the two best guitar players at that time.
Well, I don't know about their personal relationship, but it's interesting. That particular track reminds me of the Grateful Dead a little bit.
I hear exactly. I hear Kreutz. I mean, I hear George Marsh playing loading zone Kreutzmann stuff.
Anyway, we had already played. Mel Graves and myself had already played with Merle at a place called the Matrix.
Oh yeah.
Where we had a night with Jerry Hahn, and then the next night we had a night with Jerry Garcia. And they were both fantastic. And I remember playing with Jerry, and both Jerrys, but Jerry Garcia was like there was a wave that I could get on, and I played very freely with him. And we had a great time. It was just I really got how profoundly wonderful a player that he was or is. Well, he is at that time. Anyway. I really got it, and then hanging out on the breaks and stuff. I mean, he's a very intellectual guy, all about the music, and he was totally into the Dead. Loved it. Loved the two drummers, So I didn't have a chance to be brought in as another drummer.
But I wanted to ask you, I know Jerry was very focused on. He was just constantly wanting to learn, and I'm wondering if they. If they borrowed from each other, if they were playing, did they ever come to see each other, or was it just back-to-back nights? I mean, I cannot believe that you were playing at the Matrix. Were you playing with Howard Wales at all, too?
I jammed with Howard. It's kind of a dim, smoke-filled room somewhere.
That's exactly where I want to be, dude. No, but it's like, I mean...
But Howard's around now. He's still playing. He's in the area.
I need to get a hold of that cat, man. The thing is... I mean, for me to sit here, what you just told me, the idea that you're playing with Hahn and Graves on Monday night, and then the Tuesday night special is maybe it was Jerry and was it John Kahn and you were playing, or was Mel and
Mel was on that, and both nights Merle was playing.
Merle was playing, so that's how you got to know Merle.
Let me think about that. I knew him before that by jam sessions, just going and sitting in places.
Would you venture down to the you talk to a lot of the guys, those, it was pretty classic, those 6 a.m. jam sessions in the Fillmore West District, Eddie Moore, Merle, Richard Groove Holmes, those kinds of guys. I mean, it was going on all night.
I never did those. I did some in Chicago where I was hired to play 6 o'clock in the morning on Sunday with John Clemmer. You know that name?
Oh, of course. Actually, no. Did you ever get a chance to? Did you run into Max Bennett out there?
No, I don't think I did.
Yeah,
if I did, I forgot. So.
Max was definitely in Chicago, and he said he learned a lot of great tricks from those South Sider African Americans. Those guys who were just in the trenches all day long. Yeah.
Well, this was a 6 o'clock in the morning gig on Sunday, and basically what you had were your pimps.
Right.
Your hookers resting.
I love it. It. Yeah.
And your connections. So I didn't want to play too many of those. It wasn't my kind of church.
But so how are you able to siphon that out? Because it was such a free time. You were living in this area that gets written off as flower power hippie movement, but it was a lot more righteous than that because you can go across the board with Sly and the Family Stone, the Loading Zone, Jerry Hahn Brotherhood. All the crazy stuff that was going on at the Ali Akbar Khan School of Music, San Francisco State, all this crazy stuff. But you really, it seemed to me like drugs were just part of the game, whether or not, whatever religion you were or not. But how were you able to avoid that, if at all?
Well, I didn't, like everyone. I experimented with LSD back when it was legal.
Back when it was legal.
And that was the real thing. And it was actually, I believe, from Sandoz Laboratories. It was legal, and it was quite powerful. And basically, that was enough for me. And I had already read Timothy Leary's books, on all these things, the Tibetan Book of the Dead and so forth. And it was a profound experience. It was quite valuable. And then it exploded, of course, and I didn't want to get into that. I saw the audiences that we were playing for not being there. I don't know if what they were taking really was the same thing or not. But I remember playing with the Loading Zone where we would be playing full sets at the Fillmore and just playing our hearts out, and there would be like no response. It's like the audience wasn't there or something. I don't think acid would have created that. I know the Grateful Dead concerts were different.
Well, yeah, it's just, there was probably mescaline. There's other types of drugs, but the idea that it was, it was legal and it was pure. That's the point. There's just too much dirty stuff out there now. But
I don't even know. I don't go there. My body couldn't afford it to go there.
No, my body. And listen, I'm 34. I couldn't afford to do it.
You notice it would just tear you down, and you were experimenting. But back then, I was daring enough to go do it, and I had someone that was with me all day, and it was quite a beautiful experience where fragrance became sound and color became fragrance and all those things. Everything got blended together, and then I blended myself back again.
Yeah, well, because I'm looking at the back cover here with Captain Bobby Stout, Mike Finnegan, Clyde Graves. The names are changing. And I know
Melvin Clyde Graves.
Yeah, I know I'm not on acid right now. So Melvin Clyde Graves, Jerry Hahn, George Marsh. How did it all? Talk a little bit about how the Brotherhood, came together. Jerry went through it, but it's not really. I'm not that sharp on it right now.
Well, let me think about it. We played at a place called the Paper Doll. Mel Graves had a connection. He got connected to Jerry, and they needed a drummer at a lesbian club in San Francisco. Wonderful place called the Paper Doll, and we played there. I don't know, 3 or 4 nights a week. Maybe it was 4. It could have even been 5. Those were great. And we played as a trio, and we were developing our own way to play, like sort of Beatles influenced and whoever influenced, but it still was jazz. And Maxine Weldon used to be the singer. She's really good.
Wow, I cannot believe that.
And
Ooh.
She would sing every night, and I got to know these great people there, and the fear of someone who has a different sexual orientation definitely was wiped out. They're just folks,
Sure.
Got to meet them all.
Oh,
and,
of course.
So that was a little education in itself, but that basically it was just great folks. And San Francisco was very open, and so we played there, and people came in and loved the music, and the manager, the guy that became our manager, came in and really wanted to get Mike Finnegan with us. And so Jerry, I think, heard Mike Finnegan, and we all agreed. Eventually, the manager took a long time to talk me into it. I smelled the fish, but I was glad I did it anyway.
Wait, hold on. You were skeptical about it? You were skeptical about it?
I just deep groove and deep soul, and we played the way we play, you know.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I didn't like about what was happening in the band is I started to play louder and louder, trying to force the sound out that was louder than was really me. And kind of around that time it broke up. That's just a coincidence. I personally am not a drummer that's comfortable playing like a lot of drummers really have figured out how to play loud. I remember hearing Billy Cobham, you know, in 1973, you know, John McLaughlin.
Right.
I was amazed at the power of it, but I was also disappointed because playing that loud absolutely eradicates certain sensitivities. You can't change your mind when you're playing that loud. It's like you're coming down with such force and such acceleration. It's not like the sensitivity of the jazz drummers that I loved.
Can I ask you, was it...
He's not a great drummer. It's just, it's just not me.
Why was it? Why did you feel compelled? Was it because of some of the bills that you were on? Some of these psychedelic rock groups? Was it in the air? Why did you feel compelled to have to drum louder?
I think it had to do with ego and needing to be big, needing to be powerful. All kinds of, I would call them, those things, false values coming into play. If the band would have stayed together, I'm pretty sure I would have solved it. It's just a coincidence that happened. But I remember, I forget which tune it was, we were in the studio at Fantasy playing something. I don't know, it might have been Hey Good Looking or something, and we played so loud. See, I didn't have good earplugs then, but we played so loud. It was ear-splitting loud, and I personally thought, this is the greatest. And I listened back at a normal volume, and it was not the greatest.
No.
It's like, I think that might have been my really big lesson. There are drummers that can play that way, and they're very successful. You know, they're good at it. So I'm not that guy, you know, those guys. I'm not that. And that was a great thing to learn. Oh. And then, personally, playing the Fillmores and playing, you know, with the Loading Zone and playing around music that was really loud like that, it also was not me. As much fun as it was, at least at that time, is no longer me. And I basically had to turn my back on it. And it made me feel a little sad, but everything worked out. But that's really what happened. It's like, no, I can't do this. This is not the right reason to play for me.
That's right. Well, it's no different than a marriage. I mean, when you know the marriage might be, you know, what are you hanging on for? This, you know, is it a codependency thing or is it really working? And the band broke up for obviously different reasons, but you know, from a playing point of view, you have to be true to yourself. I mean, you look at Mitt Romney right now. What a classic example of somebody who can't be himself, and inevitably, when you're like that, you're going to get contorted and turned around. And the best thing you can do is get out while you can, and which is what you did.
You're talking about Mitt Romney?
Well, what I'm talking about is the fact that the guy that you were relating it back.
I understand.
Yeah,
I understand.
Yeah, no, I mean, I know I segued out of there. I was just, I
wouldn't be able to run.
I'm enjoying watching him contort himself because I'm just not a big fan. But what you just relayed was an idea of being true to yourself.
Yeah, I get it. I totally get it.
And so,
I hope he doesn't win.
Well, no, he will not win. At the end of the day, he will probably lose by 5 to 6 percentage points. That's my prediction.
Good.
Yeah, but you know, this is a good segue. I wanted to play a tune off the Brotherhood album and come back and talk about it. Okay?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you know, even in that song, I hear you pushing the tempo too. I mean, it's slow, but you're actually doing your own original stuff in the background too.
I can't help it.
It takes like that gospel, that Gulf Coast gospel sound with that Bay Area vibe, and there's a country gospel feel, but it also has that Bay Area vibe. It's unbelievable, man. I listen to that, with my daughters, and I also listen to Moses quite a bit, and it really grooves, and you have to listen. And that, to me, is the best part about the Brotherhood and all the stuff. I have albums here, I don't have that Zeitlin album. I might need to get a burned copy of that one. But
Which one you talking about? Which Zeitlin?
The 73 with you and Mel on it.
There's one called Zeitgeist.
This is called like Expansions or...
Expansion, yeah.
I need that. That one looks... But I guess it's just... speaking of the general zeitgeist of the culture now, things aren't predicated on listening as much. Whereas I think back then musically it was all about listening, because mainly you had real people playing instruments. It wasn't a digital drum machine and all these other contraptions, Yeah,
there's a very negative aspect to the drum machine. I guess because of what you just said, because they don't breathe.
Well, it goes for anything. Somebody can put together a track and an overdub. Richard Green told me that. He's like, he goes, I was playing with Bill Monroe in a barn in front of 5 people who had a combined total of 3 teeth, and he goes, but there was something, you just had to play. Even you just had to play it, and it came from your soul, and you didn't have time to think about it. When you go in, and he goes, I don't want to be a hypocrite, because there's, he goes, I've done a lot of overdubbing and stuff that on my stuff, and it sounds great, but it does strip it of the soul. And you guys were just, it was all a beautiful thing, and you could walk out of those sessions and just be on a natural high. I would assume for quite a long time.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's interesting. John Hammond, the great John Hammond. Mm-hmm. Was in the studio for one of those, and he told me he liked the gospel feeling. He wanted me to listen. He said, why don't you listen to more gospel music? It'd be great, wouldn't it? Kind of giving me a fatherly direction to go. That was fun. Yeah, well, you were playing George Marsh, and it worked great. You were filling in. You were speaking your own language, and you were sequencing it in such a way where it just kept driving the music along. Jerry takes if you compare that to Garcia might have cut that off maybe a couple of not sure what the right musical term is, bars or stanzas before, and Jerry just kept peeking out that solo. Yeah, he did, yeah.
It was really just unbelievable. And Mel, totally in the pocket, and I just, as we wrap up part 1 here, George, I just wanted you to talk about your personal relationship with Mel and what he meant to your career and to music in general.
Well, I met him when first of all, when I moved here, it was set up for me to meet Denny Zeitlin by my friend Bill Matthew, later Dean Matthew, and so I met Denny. He was playing at a place called the Trident. And it was kind of set up. I went and sat in, and he liked how I played. And I believe the drummer, I forget who it was now, Oliver Johnson, I believe, was the drummer. He was going to be moving on. He was going to be moving to Paris or something. Mm-hmm. So I sat in, and then a little bit later it was set up, and I don't know if Mel was playing with Denny at that time or not, but a little later, actually that was the year before, and I came, then in 67 that was set up, and then 68 I came, and then I came over to Denny's house, and Mel Graves was the bassist. That's where I met him. And immediately it worked. And there was something that happened to the drummer that was going to be playing a concert with Denny, and I learned all the material, and we played at the San Francisco Conservatory. We played a concert there. And kind of from then on, I was in the band. We were together a long time. And Mel and I worked also with Jerry Hahn. That was when I first met him with Denny, and then he called me onto the gig with Jerry Hahn, and we were hanging out and talking. And then we started to play freer music together. We would play with a guy named Art Landy, great pianist. A little later with a guy named Mike Knock.
Oh my! I'm obsessed with the Fourth Way. Fourth Way. Oh my God.
That was another thing that was happening at the time. here in San Francisco at the same time that we got together. So we were all a little bit similar. We were taking jazz and putting it into more popular so-called rock or whatever. We were blending things. And anyway, Mel and I played. Mel got me. I was teaching at the San Francisco Conservatory. I was teaching there from '68 to '78. Had my own little room there and taught drums to the kids, jazz drums.
Right.
And at the same time, Alaudine Matthew was teaching improvisation there. It was a required course that you had to learn improvisation. That's finally coming back. But getting back to Mel got me the gig at UC Santa Cruz, the teaching job. He set it up for me, and I came and did a polyrhythms demonstration. And I still teach there. It's been 31 years. And
heavy rains today in the old Pueblo, but that's not going to stop part 2 of my interview with drummer from the past and modern drummer still, George Marsh, just on a return from a retreat in, why don't you talk a little bit about, was it in Mendocino?
It was east of Mendocino in the mountains in an area called Cazadero. And the center itself is called Ratna-Ling, R-A-T-N-A. L-I-N-G, and it's run by some Tibetan Buddhists. They don't lay a Buddhist trip on you, but there's these wonderful rooms for yoga and presentations of all sorts. Great people, very quiet, and the intensive is what we would call it, deep listening intensive that was facilitated by Pauline Olivares, who's 80 this year.
Right.
A great improviser and teacher. And I would consider Pauline truly one of my teachers. We all learn from one another, of course. We can always be one another's teacher. But she's really special. And she facilitates ways of people of all skills of being able to improvise together using sounds, gestures. This particular group of people consisted of some of us who are master level, we might say, and other people who were almost beginners. Yet all 20 of us, by the end of the 5 days, were breathing, feeling, loving, playing music, and moving all together in a way that can only be defined as a combination of brain and love. And so it informs my playing. It helps me with my teaching. It keeps things in correct balance, I would say, because of my particular situation as a musician. Some musicians play all the time, almost, like Jack DeJohnette, and I've never been that kind of player. I've been someone who would like to play a certain amount and teach and then think, and then come back out again. It's my way of doing it.
I think this was part of our conversation in round 1, but it was that idea when you're working with students or musicians, and if let's say the horn player is just overplaying and too loud, you might not directly call them out, but you might actually say, well, let's hear something with a little less horn in it. These sort of teaching strategies that don't go out to accost or ostracize or embarrass, but more like to the point of indirectly getting your message across.
Well, I think that really sums it up, and the temptation would be to call someone out on it. But if you step back, if you can do that and take a view that is positive and actually can see the goodness of what someone is doing, it always works better. I mean, there will have to be exceptions to that if someone was just kind of really kind of gone. Someone who doesn't seem to have any control, then you have to deal with that another way.
Because it
but
seems,
generally speaking, that works quite well. And actually, it's getting more down to the truth of it, I think, rather than saying you're not playing correctly. That person may be actually thinking they are and doing the best they can. So it can be approached more positively, then it's, it just really contributes more to the overall experience.
I feel like if you go to one of these, again, I have not gone to anything like that, like the one that your wife just attended, but I tend to think that, like you said, from a novice point of view, which is what I would be, I mean, it would be very hard unless you were a really strong mind to be able to go in to these sessions, meditative sessions, sharing information. If you didn't feel totally secure with yourself, because you would then become kind of spastic, whether that would be through expressive language, or just trying to do too much, or trying to do, I just know that when I get into those situations, I tend to feel insecure because everybody else is letting things kind of happen naturally as opposed to forcing it. And so I wonder how you deal with some of the younger cats that might show up and are curious, but that they're a little exuberant, or maybe or do you even try to manipulate that? If they're being disruptive, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Well, and there's a couple of things that you stated. That the first one is which I believe you said you would feel a little uncomfortable possibly going into one of the intensives that I just went into. But with a teacher like Pauline Oliveris, she will guide you through it. It can be a bit grueling, but everyone was able to actually become part of what she calls deep listening. And the very beginning of these is like a 15-minute meditation on sound. And the first instruction was focus, I believe this is what she said, focus on sounds that are inclusive versus exclusive. So exclusive sounds are something very specific, like the sound of your blood or the sound of the bird. And inclusive is all of the sounds. And so you just quote unquote meditate on that for 15 minutes. And then after that would be a very simple exercise, so to speak, in which we would all be in a circle, like 21 of us, and we would go around and say our name, and then we would go around again and say our name the way we would like to have it spoken to us, and then the whole group would respond. So it's just amazing. Everyone would be a little different. Some people would be kind of shy, and others would have a little song in the way their name was said. And you would kind of gradually get to know one another, and then there would be exercises where you would be holding hands in a circle and kind of sending the signal around. And as the signal, which was a little hand grip thing, it goes around. As the signal goes around, you would make a breath sound, and et cetera, et cetera. So there are ways that Pauline can bring a group together that that help you get out of that place where you feel a bit shy or whatever. Everybody comes there with a different feeling. Some people are just like saying all kinds of things and making all kinds of weird sounds and just letting it out, and other people are very, very quiet, and it's all just fine. So that's a response to your first statement. The second one would be, how do I deal with it? Well, I'm dealing with my students, and a lot of that's very specific, how to hold a drumstick and how to play a certain rhythm, but I do try to bring them into what I've been calling inner drumming, which is really working on focusing on how energy can flow from limb to limb, and doing it very carefully and slowly. And the object is to increase response times till it's up to, if possible, Olympic athlete speed. So that as a drummer, a musician in general, you want to be able to go very quickly from one limb to another. And not only that, you want to have that availability to respond when the response is called for, very much like a martial art. And so that's how I teach my private students. And then if I'm dealing with, working with a bunch of really fine players at the faculty at Sonoma State where I teach, just great players, we have a way of playing music games together. Now, that's a situation where it's not so much criticizing one another, it's not really necessary, but rather we're trying to deal with ways of bringing different types of textures to the music or different approaches, because in playing jazz or rock and roll or whatever, and you can very easily get into habits that tend to, even if you don't recognize it, tend to kind of put you to sleep a little bit. And the point of what we're doing in our get-togethers there with the faculty is to open things up and keep an awareness of that possibility of bringing something fresh into maybe playing a standard jazz tune, but bringing something fresh to it. And I don't think you can do that by just doing it over and over and over again the same way. I think the way you do it is you look at elements of sound and music and improvisation that aren't necessarily connected to the history of the jazz music, but then exploring that element, then bringing oneself back to this way of playing that is older and classical, actually, and then bringing that new viewpoint to the improvisations in the older forms. Boy, that was pretty long-winded.
Yeah, I'm looking here at a review from Ed Soph, Modern Drummer, Volume 8. It says, this is the inner drumming book written by my guest, George Marsh. It says, the book constantly stresses virtues which are necessary for playing the drum set musically in any style: listening, concentration, a sense of form and structure, melodic development, physical and mental relaxation, and freedom with benign discipline. This is classic, though. Don't make the mistake I almost did. Get this book and live with it for a while. The only limitations of Mr. Marsh's book are the imagination and patience of the person studying it, which to me is, I haven't read the book, but I have to believe that you're giving people tools and maybe even things to work with those tools, but it's up to them to put it into their own application. However they want to build it, they can glean what they want from it.
Exactly. So it's not a style.
No.
It's like the martial art in that sense. If you there's a style, I suppose, or a way of approaching inner drumming. You know, I have these exercises in different combinations of limbs and exercises with those, and so you could call that a bit of a style. But it's not any musical style that we know of. And am I sounding better? Volume-wise?
No, you sound perfect.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, if when I studied Tai Chi had a different form. Yet, in its origin, I believe one of the aspects of it was truly a martial art. So, if anything would happen where someone would be coming at you to do you harm, you would just respond, and it's a little bit like that with inner drumming. So, I'm rewriting the book right now, and hopefully have this published within a few months if I really get on it. And what I'm going to do is try to handhold, so to speak, the drummer reading it, so that when they go through it, they'll even get it more clearly. I've had many questions from people about the book over the years, and it's kind of, I think what's happened is that the information is kind of concentrated, and that also I'm going to make a DVD, which will really help, and then probably do some Skype lessons with people to help it. But, you know, if you've ever tried to learn something like Tai Chi by reading a book, or yoga by reading a book, it's not easy.
No.
And the videos definitely help, you know.
Do you...
Or maybe a Skype, visual thing could help get someone started. But I'm going to try, and I have a couple of people who are interested in putting the book out, and I'm going to work hard to try to make it much more user-friendly.
Well, I mean,
I've had many questions about it, and how do you do this or that? And I'll just say, well, did you read page 7, paragraph 1? No. Well, will you please read it?
Well, I got to write that down and remember to talk to you about that a little bit later, because I'm not going to bring this up on the interview. We were talking off air for a minute. I told you my show, I have more Facebook friends that aren't my friends. They live in Japan, and they live in Europe, but they have a deep sense of appreciation, and they actually understand what I'm doing. Whereas a lot of my real friends are not as aware. I don't want to use the word sophisticated, but talk about sort of the interest from the countries outside of the United States that have expressed interest in your book.
Well, that's interesting. Let me think about that a minute. Why that would be?
Well, I think.
One thing is there is an approach to improvised music in Europe that has jazz as part of it, whereas here jazz is I mean, that's not quite correct, but jazz is more. There's more division here between jazz, like Art Blakey style and that great stuff, and the free improvisation is very possibly more of a division amongst the drummers. I'm guessing here, and I would guess that the people in Europe could consider all of that music as music. It could be fusion, it could be European style jazz, and most of them most likely have studied music more in their grade school and high school and college. Not college so much, but have music as part of their education, whereas a lot of schools don't have that here in our country. So
and I think
that's one of the factors. Is just a general appreciation. I mean, you have to hear this stuff, different kinds of music, before it makes any sense.
The thing I would say is that this is not just segregated to Europe, but education in general, music education has fundamentally changed in our country, where it's become not necessarily Sonoma State, but there are the real big music schools have become real money making factories. And in Europe, I think education, there's much more of an incentive to actually learn this kind of stuff that you're talking about: mind, body, vestibular, multisensory, and incorporating all sorts of disciplines. It's not going to bring in a lot of money, and therefore, in our university system at the educational level, it's not going to be as appealing because we have become rather corporate in almost every area.
Yeah, well, hopefully, hope you're wrong. But
no, I don't think I am.
And I don't really know all the details of Europe. I haven't traveled there that much. It's just what I've heard from other people.
But you said to me that you had people express interest in your book from outside of the United States, in like Norway and places like that.
Yeah, and Japan and Hawaii, kind of all over. Yeah. I could look on a map and see where they were from.
I would sum it up like this. I mean, listen, when you guys are the legends, the Charlie Parkers, the Coltranes, the Art Blakeys. They're no longer with us, but you guys are that next generation of people that, like we talked about in the first interview, substance, musical abilities in all different idioms. And also you grew up in a very loose time and also the location of where you were. And I think the Japanese especially, I mean, I have a huge amount of Japanese friends on Facebook who live in Japan because I think that they inherently as a culture, they see the superficiality of today's music scene and the industry and how it promotes music, and they relish and want to go back and say, I am reminding them, and not just reminding them, these people, a lot of the guys I talk to still go to Japan and they're treated like royalty there. And it's kind of like going back to learn. You need to know where you come from before you move ahead. I think you told me that too, And I think that the Japanese are ahead of the curve on this. They understand that there's an indigenous quality to music. We've lost a lot of it through, this idea of, the digitization of music and the loops and the. My feeling is that there's just an appreciation and an understanding of that. More so here, hasn't really caught on here that much. There are pockets. I'd say Northern California is probably one of the leading examples, but that's kind of my, limited thesis on that after doing this for 20 months.
Yeah, so what you're saying is that there are people overseas and in Japan in particular who can see that there's this music that they understand as being more real, more alive, and a lot of those people are gone. And that there's also a lot of corporate music that's kind of created by, like you said, loops and whatever. And I think all that stuff is fine within itself. I mean, it's as long as it doesn't choke out everything else. And
well, that's the thing, is that it's that current music is void of any intimacy, and so therefore there's no soul. And
I know, and the pseudo-intimacy that's built in is fairly disgusting.
I don't even understand. I mean, I don't listen, and we're not. I just feel when it comes to those, the fact that I'm reaching you guys at a point in your careers where you're still being very creative and very productive. It's essential, but it's not being picked up in this country because at this point, art is. I mean, you look at any news articles. I mean, there's a certain philosophy driven by one political entity and their corporate benefactors that just want to strip the arts. They just don't see any value in art at all. And they want to get rid of music programs in schools. I mean, it comes down to the fact that the appreciation of music as an art and a science is not as relevant as it was back when Earl McIntyre and Warren Smith opened up that crazy school in Old Westbury in 1971. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, but it's like
I don't know. Enlighten me.
Yeah, well, and I'm gonna have to go back and listen to the interview, but it was like it was an ethnic music program at Old Westbury in New York, 1971. That was opened by Earl McIntyre and Warren Smith, and they took in. I think their student demographics were like 25% African American, 25% white, 25% Latino, and then they had an additional amount of Asians coming over. But it was a school devoted to teaching about indigenous music, whether it was from Africa or from other places like that. And there was instruction. I mean, Warren and I talked about it in depth, and I'm just saying to myself, my gosh, I mean, you want to talk about a society that was very open-minded, and that had and the funding was there to do this kind of stuff for young people. It didn't cost an insane amount of money either. Those are the kinds of, it just seems to me like there is a choke. I feel very much a choking off of the soul in our, in a generic sense throughout our country. Not in some urban centers have maintained it with some common sense strategies, but in general, I get a lot more. There's a lot more hearkening back to. There's a lot less thinking and a lot less analyzing, and a lot more knee-jerk and trying to fit things into sound bites and trying to just, when it comes to music, getting something out there that people can just not even have to process. I don't even understand half the words that these singers are saying anymore. They're singing so fast. The music's going so fast. I don't hear anything. I don't hear these long 7-minute tracks the way you guys would do it in the Brotherhood, where it would just sort of organically, manifest. And I tend to think that the other part of it is, let's be clear, it's not just a siphoning off of the arts. It's also the fact of the kind of values you guys had and have. I mean, the idea.
I think it's all well said what you just said. I think it's also possible to. This is an interesting thing that came to my mind. You can actually listen to the sound of words and not literally know, and not know the literal meaning, but still get it.
Yeah.
And what I hear a lot of music today, and actually, frankly, I don't listen to a lot of it, but what I've heard, I don't get anything.
No.
So